Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of our ideas on the opportunities and challenges to digitization of agriculture in South Africa. My name is Bernard Slippers, and I'm joined by my colleagues Wynand Steyn, Nikki Crew, and Sunil Maharaj. In their most recent Technology Quarterly, The Economist deals with the future of food, from lab-grown meat to meat alternatives to dense factory-style indoor vertical farming. But it also reminds us that the food on our tables connects us to the planetary, that our food has an outsized impact on the world's ecosystems and climate, both through the scale of its operation and the intensity of the resources it consumes. There is clearly a need to make agriculture more productive to feed a growing human population, while at the same time rapidly reducing its footprint. One of the emerging ways to do this is through digitization, with technologies from robotics to sensors to highly enabled tractors. The example I'm giving here is a tractor that's enabled through AI to distinguish between weeds and crops and only spray the chemical on the weed, thereby reducing the amount of chemical used and making the process much more efficient. It's also more than automation and digitization of operations. It's helping us deeply transform our understanding of production systems and the biological systems behind them. It is also a rapidly growing market, expanding with more than 10% annually at a global scale. Companies such as John Deere, that used to be equipment manufacturers, now view themselves as data-driven technology companies that views data as the new soil. It's a market that is expected to grow by 2025 to $20 billion US. This is also true in Africa, where farmers are now spoiled for choice for service providers providing precision agricultural platforms. The example I'm showing here is from a company called CropWatch Africa, providing both remote sensing and sensor data integration for decision making on the farm. These technologies, together with improved crops, treatments, and other methods, have significantly increased the productivity with which we grow crops. And the images that you see are of the 10 most widely grown grain crops. The blue line depicts yield, while the purple line depicts the area planted, and you will see that the blue line grows much more rapidly in most cases than the purple line because of these growth in productivity. But you'll also see that in many of these cases, or the maps that you see, Africa is not colored in green, because Africa in most of these cases is not the main producer globally of these 10 most widely grown grain crops. There are various reasons for this low productivity in agriculture in Africa, from infrastructure and technology to political instability to fragmentation. South Africa, for example, has 35,000 commercial farmers and 4 million small-scale farmers, and that scales to many millions more across the rest of Africa. It's not because Africa doesn't have the land. As you can see on the map with the orange and green bars, the orange bars depicting the current use of arable land for agriculture and productivity linked to it, and the green bars depicting the potential use of arable land. So there's a lot of potential to further explore. But Africa also faces challenges, in particular with climate change. And you see in the red and orange colored areas that will be reducing in productivity due to climate change, or expected to do so in the coming decades. The area colored in red in South Africa covers many of our most productive maize growing areas. Can digitization help bridge this divide and make agriculture in Africa more productive? There are a number of recent reports, such as this one by the Malabo group called Byte by Byte, that points out that there are many challenges to implementing these ICT strategies in African agriculture, but equally notes many examples of how these technologies are already helping farmers leapfrog the other challenges to make their farms more productive and more profitable. These reports also point out that there's a particular role for young people in the uptake of these digital technologies. The average person in Africa is 19 years old, and this brings many opportunities for training and for rapid uptake and integration of these technologies. It is for this reason that the University of Pretoria is looking to its experimental farm, old experimental farm that's conveniently situated in the middle of the capital of Pretoria and surrounded by the seat of government and other research organizations, and is turning this into a digital twin and an open-air research space for digital agriculture. We're also in Innovation Africa, which is a word you've heard a couple of times now already, building a bridging platform that connects the expertise in the university with that in industry and government and broader society, because we believe that is critically necessary to implement the change in our African agricultural systems. And with that, I'm going to pass the talk over to my two colleagues, Professor Wynand Steyn and Dr. Nikki Crew, to talk about work that they are doing in this field.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Wynand Steyn, and I will cover the digital agricultural engineering part of this presentation. I will focus on what we can call agricultural engineering, looking at a bit of background to our Engineering 4.0 facility, how that supports transdisciplinary research at our campus, looking a bit at sensor networks, then more specifically at agricultural sensors, and lastly at smart alternative transportation platforms. Engineering 4.0 is a relatively new facility on the University of Pretoria campus. It was developed originally with a focus on smart transportation research and supported by the university and the National Roads Agency. However, the location of Engineering 4.0 as a facility on what has traditionally been our experimental farm and what is currently developed as the Innovation Africa at UP campus lended itself to the engineering application support on this campus. As Bernard has indicated, there are various other types of traditional plant sciences, animal sciences, agricultural sciences research being conducted on this campus. And as we started up the facility, we realized that although a major part of what we are doing is still focusing on the traditional transportation networks, optimized, smart, equitable, looking at social and economic development, the transdisciplinary aspect of what we are working on started to become much more visible, and it appeared that this facility can be the nexus between the various plant, animal, and engineering sciences that we are focusing on at the University of Pretoria. So I will cover a bit of detail on the sensor networks that we developed over here that supports not only the engineering work, but also the agricultural sciences, and then the way that we are using smart alternative transportation platforms in supporting this type of research and teaching and learning. So in terms of our sensor networks, we make extensive use of sensors from an engineering viewpoint. There are various parameters, ambient environmental conditions, air quality, temperature, humidity, various aspects that affect our typical traditional engineering infrastructure. Then there are various infrastructure specific conditions, water usage, electricity usage, stresses and strains in buildings and so on. And pretty quickly after we started to use this facility, we realized that making use of a traditional sensor network where we had sensors installed with wiring to data acquisition systems that you have to support continuously in terms of electricity and you have to download data and so on is not necessarily going to be the optimal way of doing things on this campus, specifically in that regard for the infrastructure specific conditions. But then in discussions with our plant sciences, animal sciences, agricultural sciences colleagues, we realized that there's a range of biosciences parameters that are also important to monitor specifically on this campus where a lot of research is being done, but in general. And a lot of these parameters are similar to what we do for infrastructure: air quality, air temperature, CO2 levels, and the like. So we started to look for a sensor network that's able to support the types of data that the various entities on this campus are looking for. We also decided that the system that we are looking for initially must be platform agnostic. We should not first decide on a platform and then see how our different types of parameters and sensors can fit into this, but we should have a look from the user side and understand what type of parameters need to be monitored at what frequencies, and then look for the available types of platforms. At the time that we developed this in 2020, the whole LoRaWAN concept started to develop very strongly. In Europe, it was running well for a few years already. In South Africa, it was very new. And after investigation, we realized that a LoRaWAN network should support the type of data collection that we are looking for. So on the right-hand side, you can see just a snippet of the type of data that we've got in the system currently. The system currently has got about 150 sensors spread out over this whole campus, focusing on a range of different types of parameters as required by researchers from various disciplines working on this area. And the important part of having all of this data together in one system is that it enables large-scale data analytics where you make use of data from various sources, which traditionally and previously would not necessarily have communicated with each other. So the agricultural sensors, for instance, here we've got some general sensors, an environmental conditions box that we call SNOOT that collects pretty much all of the standard environmental conditions. Then we've got dedicated environmental sensors that you can place at certain spots. We've also got access through our infrastructure work to a LiDAR system, and this LiDAR data, where traditionally we look at buildings and infrastructure, now also is used to evaluate plants. This is in an orchard itself, so you can start to get detailed digital images of plants, and obviously once you've got the data, the analysis of that can follow. But if you don't have the data, the analysis cannot happen. In terms of the support for the agricultural research, obviously then we've got sensors in greenhouses, in fields, as Nikki has indicated, our smart sunflowers. So you can have dedicated sensors developed for a specific application, looking at how a sunflower reacts to sunlight, or you can have general sensors that looks at the general ambient temperature continuously so that we understand what happens in the environment. In terms of the engineering research and the support there, we focus on what we call smart agriculture. As an example of this smart agriculture, I would like to share some of the information on what we call our smart avocados and smart tomatoes, SMAVO and SMATO. From an engineering viewpoint, we had a need to look at the effects of transportation logistics on transported fruits and vegetables. So we wanted to know, how does the condition of the road affect the avocados and tomatoes on a truck? But in order to do that, we need to determine what an avocado and a tomato experience when they are actually being transported. So we developed these smart fruits and vegetables. There's a range of them, where we developed a microcomputer that sits inside a 3D printed exoshell. Some of them are more flexible, like the tomatoes. Some of them are more rigid, like the avocados. And on the inside there, we measure parameters such as temperature, relative humidity, the accelerations, so we can see how much it bumps up and down. The gyroscope, we can see what's on top, what's at the bottom. Based on that, we can look at things like rotational velocity, and we've got barometric air pressure. So we collect a range of data that this artificial fruit is experiencing anywhere in the cycle that we are. So for instance, if we introduce these smart avocados in a pack house, we can look at different types of pack houses, And you can see at the data at the bottom, which is acceleration data and the three main directions, that on the left-hand side, we've got an optimized pack house where there's a short duration in a specific part of the pack house with smaller amplitudes of bumping up and down as it runs through the system, which is obviously better than the pack house on the right-hand side, which is unoptimized. We've got larger amplitudes, so our avocados are bumping up and down more and for a longer duration. And obviously, that leads to more potential damage. After doing an investigation using this technology on 39 different pack houses, we developed this type of guidance where it indicates the total fall distance of the fruits in the pack house itself, measured with the smart avocados, as well as the calculated cumulative kinetic energy that the fruit is experiencing. And looking at what comes out of the pack house, we split this up into 4 quarters, where at the bottom left, we've got relatively low fall distances, relatively low cumulative kinetic energy, and therefore those are the better pack houses. Then you can identify pack houses where you've got excessive handling or excessive dropping, and then finally you've got the few pack houses there that's got both excessive handling and dropping, and obviously are the ones that you do not want to use. The next part of this study was to understand how does transportation logistics actually affect our transported fruits. So we started in South Africa, a small farm in the northern part in Muketsi. We transported these smart avocados and tomatoes all the way down via road to Cape Town, then got it on a ship and we transported it all the way to Rotterdam. So in that process, we could focus on firstly the processing and packaging from the field through the pack house, then the local transportation network where it focuses on what happens on a vehicle on a road, then the transcontinental freight on the ship, and then the last mile target transportation network. So you've got parts where the local transportation network is important, and you've got parts where there are third-party transportation networks, cold chains, and so on that are important. So, interesting stuff from the study. I'm just highlighting one or two of these is, for instance, the accelerometer data while the fruits were on a ship. We measured high frequency orientation data. We used that at 1 Hertz. And this 1 Hertz data actually revealed the rolling and oscillation periods of the ship. So if you look at this, that is our orientation angle and the pitch in the time. And we can see a typical sort of a 14-second oscillation period that happened during the shipping process. And it happened at different times. So it's most probably, looking at the engineering viewpoint, related to the dimensions of the ship combined with the wave action that we experienced. And we saw up to a 4-degree vessel roll. And this part is now our data directly from the fruit on the ship. And the important part, also together with this collected satellite data through Fleetmon, that provides us with data on the weather conditions, the location of the ship, wave action, and we can now put together all of this data. So what did the smart avos and tomatoes experience during the trip? Where did they experience it? And what was the conditions during that time? So you can provide a full picture of the experiences of these avocados and tomatoes from the field where they were harvested through the pack house, on the road, on the ship, up to the final destination. Why is all of this important? Because everything affects the final condition of your fruits and vegetables. And the consumer wants to buy something that's in a good condition. And it's not only the genetics of the plants that's important. Obviously, that's a very important part. It's not only the growing conditions, that's also an important part, but it's also the whole transportation logistics chain. And that's what we focus on from the engineering side, but in a transdisciplinary way, talking to our agricultural and plant sciences colleagues to see what can we expect to happen to our fruit. I also mentioned smart alternative transportation platforms. This is a word that we use to indicate those platforms different than tractors and trucks and ships to get our sensors into the fields. So we are using these for, from an engineering viewpoint, typically infrastructure evaluation, where we can run through a building, fly over a building, and obtain different types of data. But also environmental monitoring, because you can see what happens in the air continuously. Plant phenotyping, Nikki touched on this also, where you can get your smart alternative transportation platform in spots in your fields and orchards where you could normally not get a sensor. Even things like forensic pathology, another transdisciplinary field where the engineering part is supporting other areas of research. So in terms of our aerial drones, obviously that's the aerial imagery. So looking from the top at what does my fields look like, what does my orchards look like, using various types of sensors, different types of wavelengths in terms of the light that we are collecting, but also having sensors for environmental conditions. So we can measure the temperature, humidity, CO2 levels, not only at ground level, but at different heights above our plants. The use of things like the quadrupedal robots is again to have a payload of sensors on the robot and then send it into my orchards or fields to collect data in a roving manner. We can pre-program it, know where it's going, or do a more random type of pattern. And the benefit of this is it is relatively small and very transportable between different fields. So if you look at the type of research that we do in Southern Africa and Africa, where you often have got remote areas that you want to go to, remote orchards, remote fields, that's part of your experiment. You can put the quadrupedal robot in your vehicle, travel all the way there, get it out, get the sensors out, and you collect data on the spot. And then the other important part of using the different platforms is to start to get them to communicate. Link the quadrupedal robot to the UAV so that you've got communication between them, so that what the UAV sees from the air can be communicated to the quadrupedal robot on the ground, and it can be guided to go to specific areas in your field. So obviously a major new field to play with in terms of data collection and understanding what happens in our fields. So in summary, I think it's not wrong to say that digital agricultural engineering is a fact of life. It's happening, it's going to grow. We need to understand that very well. In terms of our sensor networks, it's important to understand that you need to select sensors and sensor networks that's appropriate for the conditions and infrastructure. Part of the discussion today is around 5G and how does this affect our sensor networks. Now, one of the first things to start the discussion is, do you have 5G available? If not, what are your other networks that's available in the area that you are interested in? And then look at things like the power consumption, the frequency at which you can load the data, the number of sensors that it can support, and make sure that you understand your objective, your requirement, before selecting your sensors and sensor networks. Why are we doing all of this? As Bernard has indicated, food security. We are not only doing it to collect data and do nice research and analysis. We are doing this in support of food security, obviously from our viewpoint for Southern Africa, but in support of food security internationally. Because if we do not look at it from a holistic, transdisciplinary viewpoint, we are going to lose out in this battle. Some acknowledgements. Got a long list of sponsoring agencies that's supporting the research that we are doing, various colleagues from engineering, the various disciplines of engineering, but also the colleagues from plant sciences, from data sciences, from building sciences, each of them bringing various different viewpoints to what we are working on. And then obviously students. A lot of students that's putting in very hard work, assisting with the systems, collecting the systems, assisting with data analysis so that we can focus on this larger issue of food security. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Nikki Crew and I'm a researcher at FABI and Innovation Africa, at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what my team's been doing in phenotyping for agricultural practices. So let's start with what is plant phenotyping. So a plant phenotype is really the physical aspects of the plant. How tall is it? How many leaves does it have? How much seed does it produce? And this is affected by two main aspects. Firstly, the environment that the plant grows in, and secondly, the underlying genetics or genotype of the plant. And these two interact to produce the phenotype of the plant. Traditionally, phenotyping has been very labor-intensive and required the researchers to go out in the field and physically measure or count the number of leaves on each plant, the height of each plant, collect and weigh the biomass or the mass produced over the season for each plant, as well as the different yield aspects required for these kinds of trials. With the advent of technologies, phenotyping has become more high throughput as technologies developed. So there have been a number of applications that involve imaging, where you can image a plant and then assess it for the size over time, how big does it get, or in this case they were looking at the health of the plant by looking at plants' leaf reflectance. So a big green healthy leaf will reflect differently to a sickly yellow leaf, and this can be used to assess plant health. This process has been applied to even larger high throughput scale experiments where drones are used to scan entire patches of the field, and you can actually assess the plant health or growth of a plant in these different patches. And you can even go one step further where you can use satellite imaging to assess an entire farm or an entire region using these processes. And my team specifically focuses on this level, looking at individual plants and how they grow. And in order to do this, we've started a collaboration with Dr. Dirk Swanefelder at the Agricultural Research Council in South Africa. And him and his team have installed the first field scan by Phenospecs in Africa. This is a robotic gantry that runs along tracks on the side of the field and carries 4 pairs of scanners. These scanners can be raised up to about 1.5 or 2 meters tall, which means for the first time now we can actually measure much larger plants such as maize and sunflower, which are key agricultural crops in South Africa. Each row gets scanned by 2 scanners, and this allows us to do 3D modeling of the plants. And each row is labeled with a metallic barcode to link the data from from the scans to a single plant within a row. Scanners can image both multispectral data such as red, green, and blue, or near-infrared, as well as have LiDAR capabilities. This means that we can do 3D modeling of the plants, and with all this information we are able to estimate biomass of the plants, plant height, leaf area as they're growing, and the scanners can scan the field every 2 hours if you so choose. We can also overlay different data such as the plant health reflectance data onto our 3D models to understand how the plants are being affected by the different conditions they are under, or the different genetics dictating their growth. So the first trial we decided to do was a maize planting date trial. Maize planting date trials are really useful tools for agronomists because they help the agronomist work out exactly when in the season is right for planting a specific crop or a specific cultivar. So we have 4 different planting dates with 6 different cultivars planted under the Phenospec and also across the country in different locations. As a plant biologist, field trials planting day trials are also really interesting because at any given time, you'll have plants of different ages in the field. And if a specific environmental phenomenon hits, such as a very wet period, you are able to assess how plants of different ages or developmental stages will respond to that environmental factor. And we found in our maize planting date trial that a specific cultivar at the third planting date was much more susceptible to specific diseases after a wet period than the older or the younger plants of the same cultivar, suggesting that there's an interaction between cultivar and environment, or genetics and environment, that is developmental age specific. So we collected scans from these plants, both top view, side view, so that we could do the 3D modeling of the plants. And we managed to scan much of the season. However, we do have some gaps in our data because, unfortunately, doing research in Africa is not always easy. And with the systematic rolling blackouts we had a backup generator fail, and so the system stopped running for some time while we got that back up and running. I'm excited for the new season that is fast approaching, because we're hoping to get a full set of scan data, but also because we plan to actually do drone imaging using thermal and infrared, thermal and multispectral imaging, so that we can relate the scans and measurements we've taken under the PhenoSpecs, which is a highly controlled environment, even though it's still a field, and compare that to a real-world field on a farm somewhere. What do we see similar growth patterns, or what could the differences be? And we have a PhD student and a postdoc who will be working together on this question this coming season. So there have been many examples of robotics entering agriculture. I'm sure you've all heard of the Boston Dynamics dog, and here's a little picture of him herding some sheep. But as a plant biologist, I am most excited by the idea that he can measure undercrop canopy environments. So taking detailed measurements of the environment under the crop will give us an understanding of the microclimate produced by the crop. And this has really important impacts on plant disease, because often the microclimate can be just right for a disease to strike. And you can imagine that if you've taken a map of the microclimate under the field, you could help a farmer identify problem areas, and he could proactively manipulate the canopy to change the microclimate and limit disease damage. There's also been advancements in robotic crop harvesting, spraying specific pesticides or herbicides in a very targeted, specified manner. And there's even been laser weeding technology entering the market these days. And so with all these advancements, plant phenotyping is generating more data than ever before. And so this is so manual phenotyping and manual data processing is becoming a thing of the past. And much of the image processing and analysis is being undertaken by applications using artificial intelligence or machine learning. And these processes really require really strong, good infrastructure and processing power to support them and to make them useful tools for farmers, agronomists, and plant biologists, so that we can better understand how to keep plants healthy and increase our food security as climate change progresses. So with that, I always have a large number of people that need thanks. So thank you to my team who are helping me maintain the maize planting date trials, our collaborator at the University of the Free State, our collaborators at the Agricultural Research Council, and of course Always a big thank you to the funders without whom this research could not be done, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Wynand and Nikki. There is of course even more to what is called Agriculture 4.0, and I will highlight just two more areas, namely pest management and breeding. To indulge some of my own research, pests and pathogens have kept pace with our globalization and in many cases outpaced the developments that we've made in agriculture and forestry. On the left you see a graph that shows almost exponential increase in pest numbers on a particular crop, and the maps on the right shows how a pest, once it's moved to one new area, continues to move around the rest of the world, something that we are all too familiar during COVID-19. Fortunately, there are very powerful ways now to both monitor and study these pests, but also to target them very directly through tools such as genetic engineering. That makes it possible for us to move away from broad-scale application of low efficiency tools such as general chemicals to highly precise and potentially efficient tools that target a specific species and even specific individuals in populations. It is also possible for us today to very precisely engineer the crops that we want, from the nutrients or the chemicals that we want them to produce to resistance to environmental or pests and diseases. To do so requires a systems approach, both for the research but also for the application and data integration in a manner that we haven't done routinely up to this point. It is for this reason that Innovation Africa has put a lot of effort into building data infrastructure that we call the Information Hub, that allows us to integrate data from many different sources, from many different sectors in a safe and secure manner into a space where we can add value to it and seamlessly feed this back to the users or potential users of this information. An example of where we have applied it is in pest and disease surveillance data for forestry, where we're able to automatically integrate information from diagnostic clinics, from trapping networks, from research done in other organizations, to information collected by companies, to the extension work that's done on a daily basis, to provide distribution maps and feedback tools that helps companies and government make decisions on a daily basis. Before I end, I want to touch on 5G in Africa. I do not have to tell this audience that 5G is set to completely transform agriculture through digitization, also in Africa, because it would make possible a massive scale-up and rollout of the kinds of technologies that Wynand and Nikki and myself were talking to. From data analytics to real-time monitoring, remote management of robotics, to the way in which we engage with experts that support the management on farm. Unfortunately, the penetration of 5G in Africa is still very low. Less than 1% of cell phones in sub-Saharan Africa are connected to a 5G network, and only South Africa and Kenya have commercialized 5G, while there are a number of other countries that are implementing this in trial phase. The challenges to 5G penetration in Africa includes the high cost of installing this infrastructure, the lingering penetration of the previous technologies, the lack of the necessary political willpower to implement and roll this out, political instability in some parts of the continent, and poor funding for infrastructure investment. So what is the way forward for digitization, or Agriculture 4.0 as it's also referred to? There are a number of comprehensive reports on this topic that have appeared in recent years, and they all agree that there is policy change that's needed, there's investment in infrastructure necessary, and development of business models. But perhaps more relevant to this meeting is the reference to the need for broad-based human capital development. And I've already referred to the youth dividend in Africa, an opportunity that we can explore to develop skills and more rapidly implement or drive the uptake of these technologies on the continent. They also point out the need for user-centric research in the continent and on the continent for the implementation of these technologies, including focusing on the marginalized communities, such as the small-scale farmers. I'm a strong believer in a holistic approach to Agriculture 4.0 that would integrate biological understanding with the digital technologies and developments. It's critical as we do this that we develop good stewardship systems and open data approaches. That is perhaps one of the biggest barriers currently to the implementation of these technologies, because data sits in silos of individual players in the market. And to do this is going to require strong partnerships, not just amongst research communities, but also across sectors, with private industry, with farming communities, and with governments. I thank you for the opportunity for this presentation and look forward to the discussion.